There is a document sitting on a government website right now. Almost nobody knows it exists. It has Jeremy Clarkson's name on it. It has a case reference. And for any farmer fighting a council over parking, visitors, diversification, or a protected landscape, it may be more useful than an entire season of Clarkson's farm. Because this was never just a car park. It was a planning playbook. And West Oxfordshire District Council never expected the paperwork from this fight to become more valuable than the fight itself. Most people remember the restaurant. They remember the headlines. Clarkson loses. Restaurant must go. Council wins. End of story. Except that was not the end. That was the distraction. Because while everyone watched a restaurant disappear, an independent planning inspector was writing something much more important. Paragraph by paragraph, line by line, a public explanation of why part of the council's argument worked, and why another part did not. That difference matters. Because this was never really about Jeremy Clarkson. It was about whether a modern farm can adapt before it dies. Diddley Squat Farm sits in the Cotswolds. Beautiful land, protected land, difficult land. It lies inside an area of outstanding natural beauty. That sounds lovely. It is less lovely when you want planning permission. In a protected landscape, nothing is simple. A barn is not just a barn. A shop is not just a shop. A car park is not just somewhere to leave a car. Every small change becomes a much bigger question. Will it damage the landscape? Will it create traffic? Will it disturb neighbors? Will it turn a farm into a commercial destination? And that final question is where British farming gets trapped. Farmers are told to diversify. They are told to sell direct. They are told to find new income. They are told to rely less on subsidies. They are told to add value. Then, the moment they try, somebody asks whether they are still really farming. That is the contradiction. And Diddley Squat drove straight into it. Jeremy Clarkson did not begin as a planning expert. He began as a television presenter from Doncaster who bought a farm and discovered that British agriculture comes with weather, markets, livestock, machinery, paperwork, and an astonishing number of people who can stop you doing anything. The farm shop became popular, very popular. People came for local food. They came for the farm. They came because they had watched the program. They came because Diddley Squat had become part of the national conversation. And every visitor arrived in the same thing. A car. That was the real problem. Not the honey, not the farm shop, not the television cameras. Cars. Cars on narrow country roads. Cars on verges. Cars blocking access. Cars creating danger. Cars turning a working farm into a traffic problem. The council thought the answer was restraint, but the cars did not disappear. They simply needed somewhere else to go. And this is where the story changes. The restaurant and the car park were not the same argument. They looked connected. They happened on the same farm. They appeared in the same headlines. But legally, practically, and strategically, they were completely different. The restaurant was one question. The parking was another. Clarkson opened a restaurant at the farm. The council objected. Enforcement action followed. Clarkson appealed. And on the restaurant, he lost. That matters. It matters because anyone saying Clarkson completely beat the council is not telling you the real story. He did not win cleanly. He did not walk away with everything. The restaurant had to go. The enforcement notice stood. The council won that part. And honestly, that is what makes the other half of the decision so powerful. Because the planning inspector did not simply side with Clarkson because he was famous. The inspector separated the weak argument from the strong one. No to the restaurant. Yes to the parking arrangements. That was the turn. The council thought it was controlling growth. It was creating a road safety problem. Because visitors were still coming. The road was still narrow. And the farm still needed a way to keep cars off it. The inspector allowed an extension to the existing parking area. Temporary parking was formalized. Access arrangements were permitted. Not forever. Not without conditions. Not because Clarkson was a celebrity, but because the evidence pointed to something simple. Unmanaged parking could be worse than managed parking. Read that again. The car park was not the problem. The uncontrolled cars were. And that distinction can change an entire planning application. Most farm planning applications begin badly. A farmer says, "I need more parking." A planning officer hears, "more visitors." A neighbor hears, "more noise." A council hears, "more commercialization." And suddenly the farmer is defending an idea that nobody has properly understood. But a stronger argument sounds different. Without safe parking, visitors stop on the road. Without safe parking, visibility gets worse. Without safe parking, access gets blocked. Without safe parking, neighbors experience more disruption. The proposal is not creating harm. The proposal is containing harm. That is the planning argument. That is what Clarkson's appeal decision gives other farmers. Not permission, not a loophole, not a guaranteed win. A better argument. Now stop, because this is the part most people misunderstand. A planning inspector's decision is not a court judgment. It is not binding precedent. You cannot download Clarkson's appeal decision, walk into your local council office, throw it on a desk, and demand your own car park. That is not how planning works. Every farm is different. Different roads, different access, different neighbors, different local policies, different landscape designations, different history, different facts. So no, this document cannot guarantee anything, but it can still matter. A great deal, because it becomes what planners call a material consideration. It is evidence. It can be read. It can be cited. It can be compared with your own circumstances. And if your facts are genuinely similar, your planning agent can use it to show how an independent inspector handled the same conflict. Farm diversification, protected landscape, visitor pressure, highway safety, parking, conditions. That is not nothing. That is where the fight begins. The refusal is not always the end. The evidence is the beginning. And here is the brutal part. Clarkson could afford to obtain that evidence. Most farmers cannot. He could pay for planning consultants. He could pay for representation. He could commission reports. He could sit through hearings. He could appeal. He could lose part of the case and keep fighting. For an ordinary farmer, one refusal can end the project. Not because the farmer thinks the council is right, but because challenging the council costs money, and time, and energy, and farming already consumes all three. That is the real inequality. Planning law may apply equally. The ability to challenge a planning decision does not. The farmer with the better argument does not always reach an inspector. Sometimes the farmer with the bigger budget does. Clarkson had that budget. But then something unusual happened. He left the file behind. The lawyers may have been expensive. The hearing may have been expensive. The reports may have been expensive. But the final decision is public. The case reference is public. The inspector's reasoning is public. And the farmer who cannot afford to build the argument from scratch can still read an argument that somebody else already paid to test. You cannot manufacture that. You can only find it. Then use it properly. The council thought it had leverage. It was creating the evidence. Every refusal creates a paper trail. Every objection must be explained. Every policy must be named. Every concern must be justified. And once a case reaches appeal, the council's decision is tested by somebody outside the district. Not emotionally, not politically, not because social media is angry, but through evidence. That is why this case matters. It is not really a Clarkson story. It is a story about what happens when a farm is forced to prove that survival creates less harm than standing still. And there is one more twist. The parking permission was temporary. That sounds like a victory. But temporary permission is planning's way of saying, we will allow this for now, then you must come back and prove it again. The clock begins immediately. The farm must show that demand still exists. It must show that the parking still works. It must show that the road still needs protection. It must reopen an argument that was supposedly settled. Same farm, same gravel, same cars, same road. Fresh uncertainty. That is why farmers become frustrated. Not because they hate rules. Farmers understand rules. Weather has rules. Livestock has rules. Markets have rules. Nature has rules. They hate being forced to restart a successful argument because a calendar page turned. And this is the full picture. A farm shop became popular. Popularity created traffic. Traffic created danger. Danger created a planning conflict. The conflict created an appeal. The appeal removed the restaurant. The appeal allowed parking. And that decision created a public record that other farmers can now use. That is not a car park. That is a planning playbook. Jeremy Clarkson did not destroy West Oxfordshire District Council. He did not win every battle. He lost the restaurant. He had to accept the decision. But in losing half the case, he exposed something more useful than a clean victory. British planning is not one giant no. It is a series of smaller questions. And if a farmer answers the right question with the right evidence, the answer can change. The failure became the lesson. The paperwork became the inheritance. And for the farmer standing in front of a planning officer with no budget for another dead-end application, that may be the most valuable thing Jeremy Clarkson ever left behind. If you have ever appealed a planning refusal, tell us what happened. Did you win? Did you lose? Or did you run out of money before anyone decided? And if you were refused something but never appealed, what stopped you? Cost? Time? Or being told the fight was hopeless? Wherever you are watching from, tell us how farm planning works where you live, because the paperwork changes. But for farmers, the fight rarely does. Thank you, as always, for watching.